So you got into a market. Now what the hell are you supposed to do? Hang out with me and we'll chat about that. Hi friends, I'm Megan from Figs and Feathers Farm, soon to be Foraged Soap Co. If you saw our last video, you know we talked all about prepping for your very first craft fair. This video, we're gonna dive a little bit deeper and talk about inventory, pricing, and what to do for your setup. I think that's what we talked about, but I have to check because I'm not 100% sure.
We're sorry, the number you have dialed is not in service.
I almost find craft shows or markets like a rite of passage for people who are just starting out on their maker journey. Everybody should do at least one or two so that they know what it's like. Not that that has to be your gig all the time or full time. I found that it wasn't my preferred method to getting my goods to people, and that's just basically because I'm a terrible salesperson. And yeah, I said it. I'm a horrible salesperson. I'm really not that good at it. So I learned from that. I chose to not sell in person at markets, but you might be different. This might be something you're really good at. It might be something that's very much in your wheelhouse, and you won't know until you try it. So, you've got your applications in, you got your acceptance. Now it's time to start really getting ready. Let's talk about inventory. Basically, you need to make enough inventory that's going to last you throughout the entire time that you're there. This can be kind of tricky, especially if you don't have a lot of experience, especially if you don't know a ton about the demographic that you're catering to. If you're doing a smaller show, you're gonna have to do some guesswork. But I will tell you, biggest mainstay rule for this is going to be more is always better than less. Let me repeat that. More is better than less. You would rather have a lot more inventory left over at the end of the day than not taking enough inventory and selling out within the first 1 to 2 hours. Because the caveat with that is a lot of markets don't like or won't let you actually leave your booth space until the event is over. And nobody wants to stand there for another 3, 4, 5 hours when they don't have anything to sell. So there are a lot of formulas. If you Google how to prepare for craft shows inventory, you're gonna find loads of formulas that people have figured out over the years. I've worked through many of those formulas over the years. I never found them to be particularly useful. And in fact, when I did a big market down in Los Angeles, I had no idea what to expect. This was a unique LA event, and it was in downtown LA at the top of one of the buildings, and it was a 2-day event, had no idea what to expect. So I just prepared anything and everything that I had because I thought, oh man, I'm gonna sell so much stuff, because they were charging people at the door, they were giving things away, blah, 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 blah. Unfortunately, I was like one of 15 different bath and body artisans that were there. I didn't sell out. I was just a little tiny company. I was actually had a booth next to another soap maker and candle maker, which that's a gripe I have. If you're an event coordinator, please don't put your bath and body people next to each other. I don't care if you're trying to group them all. It's not a good idea because people get overwhelmed, but that's a side note for another time. So I was at this event, placed next to a much bigger, well-known soap artisan. I sold some stuff. Did I sell out of stuff? Oh, hell no. And in fact, I had to pack all that crap back up and drive it back home. And in the end, I ended up losing something like $400 on that market. Because when you figure in things like gas to get down there, hotels to stay in, the cost of the booth fees, which was astronomical, when you figure all of those things in and you compare that against how much money you bring in, it's sometimes not a really pretty picture. And that was a bitter lesson to learn, because I thought that I was like hot because I got accepted to this amazing market that was a big deal, and it turns out that it was just totally a dud for me. And that's what happens, you know, sometimes you get a little too cocky, go into these things thinking you know everything about everything, and you really don't. Keep that in mind. There are lots of different formulas to figure out how much inventory to bring. The basic guideline to come back to if you don't feel like getting into all of that is just prep as much as you can. You don't have to bring thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars worth of inventory. That's just not realistic. If you're doing a big event like Renegade or West Coast Craft or even Unique LA or some of those other ones, sure, you're gonna wanna prepare a lot more because they tend to run 2 days or an entire weekend. about pricing for just a minute. Pricing is always going to be a sticking point. If you're brand new to this, if you've only sold on Etsy, if you're still trying to feel out the market, pricing can be one of those things. When you're just starting out, I know it's really hard to figure out or decipher your pricing. And a lot of your pricing is going to come from going on Etsy or looking people's pages through Instagram and sort of gauging and measuring your pricing against theirs. First started out, a lot of people sold their soap for $5 or $6. So naturally, what I did was, I'm gonna sell my soap for $5 or $6 because that's what everybody else does. And I don't wanna be the one odd person out that's charging more or charging less. That works to an extent. The key thing to remember is whatever you are doing for pricing, and this is going to carry over to your market, you need to be recouping your costs. A lot of beginners tend to overlook what things really cost. I've watched other YouTube videos about pricing, and it's usually make sure that it's covering these three things. It's covering your raw materials, and it's covering your shipping, it's covering labor. What I never see people talk about, how much did it cost you to get to that market? How much did you pay in your booth fee? How much did you pay in gas to get there? How much did you have to pay for parking if it's at a downtown area? That should all be coming back to your pricing. Likewise, if you're at home and you're working on your stuff, how much electricity did you use? How much water are you using? Not just your raw materials, not just your labor, which also, we'll talk about that at some point too. Labor has to come into this. If you're not paying yourself, then this isn't a job. Then you just have a hobby. So make sure that you're paying yourself. Even if it's $5 here and there, I don't care, but make sure you're paying yourself something. All of these same things are applicable to your market. Did you have to buy stuff for your setup? Did you have to buy a table, buy a tent, get linens, items for decor, whatever it is?
Fill in the blank.
All of those things need to come back to your pricing, because at the end of the day, if you're not charging enough to recoup those costs, then you're gonna end up like I did with the big market in LA, and I'm gonna just lose a ton of money. While I would never trade that experience for anything, it's still a very expensive lesson, and I don't want you to have to go through the same things that I went through. You need to have your own struggles. You don't need to borrow mine. Getting back to pricing basics. Things to think about. Make sure that your pricing is covering your costs. Please, whatever you do, don't price your goods to just sell. Don't go into this with the attitude of, well, I just want to move as much stuff as possible, so I'm going to charge the cheapest price I can. That's going to backfire for many reasons. One, you're going to end up losing money. Number two, you're undercutting anybody else who's at that market that's offering something similar. It's not fair for me to come into a market and sell my soaps for $4 when the person 3 tents down is selling them for $10. That's obviously not going to work for either one of us. Make sure that you're pricing things adequately, recoup all of your costs, and you're pricing at a fair market value. Fair market value can mean a lot of things to different people. I kind of had to get very uncomfortable with the fact that I tend to sell soap that's more expensive than other people. There's a lot of labor that goes into my goods, not just the soap making, but the growing of the goods, the harvesting of the goods, the storage of the goods, and then eventually using of the goods. When I make soap and I'm using oil that was, say, infused with wild mallow, I have to take into account we went out, harvested the mallow, dried the mallow, infused the mallow into the oil for however long, and then used the oil into my soap. So that's a little bit more labor intensive than somebody who just uses oil that they bought at whatever online supplier. I use extra virgin olive oil that's grown by a local grower in my area. It's not cheap. I in fact pay a lot more even when I buy it in bulk. And because I'm using higher end product, that has to carry over into my end pricing. These are little nitty-gritty things that nobody ever told me, and it's one of those weird things that you don't really know about until you show up and you've dealt with it. When you price your goods, say you've set your prices on whatever it is that you make or that you're offering, how are you going to relay those prices to the public? There are many ways to do this. I found that some ways work better than others. I have done it where I don't put any pricing. People will ask you, who are brave enough to ask you. I wouldn't. If I didn't see prices, I would turn around and walk right out, because that's just how introverted people are. I'm too shy to talk to strangers. But the people who aren't are going to ask you for your pricing. I've absolutely done that in a market maybe that I didn't have time to prep enough for. I just don't put pricing and I just make it up on the fly. You can do that. Something else you can do is you can have signage that has the pricing of each individual item. This is a very old example, but here you could see I had a price list and I had each item, and I took washi tape and everything every time something would sell out, I would just put washi tape over the top of it. That seems to work really well. The only downside about this, it's really crooked, so don't judge me. The only downside about this is that I found that people are really not that observant. People who pay attention will absolutely see this, but there's a whole host of people out there that are not. They're not great at paying attention to details. They don't notice things, and this could be sitting 6 inches away from their face, and they will still ask you, how much does a box of soap cost? Even though it says right there, soaps in boxes, price. I've done it where you have one, I've done it where you've had several. People will still ask you. That's going to be up to you. Way back at the beginning, I actually bought a price gun, and I priced every single item that way, and I would just sit there and I would pull the sticker out and I'd put it on the bottom of every single item. That works, but it's very time consuming. That's the big downfall with that. And the other downfall is sometimes the stickers leave gummy residue, and that's kind of a pain to sort of like pull it off again. If you're using soap boxes or using something with paperboard, it's gonna damage or rip off on paperboards. Those are the downsides of using that. I've also done little individual signs that you can either clip or write onto. These used to be chalkboard, but I painted them with rose gold a couple years ago for a market I did. When you go to do your pricing, after you've decided how much everything is going to cost, how are you going to get that information to your public? And think about when you go shopping and what works best for you. What kind of a shopper are you? Something else that people never seem to talk about. This is a big one if you live in states that charge sales tax like I do. I live in California, and every single county in California charges a different rate for sales tax. Boy, it's just so much fun. We charge a ton in sales tax. California ranges anywhere from about 8 to 10%. Take that into account with your pricing. Are you going to charge sales tax on top of that? Meaning that every time somebody hands you something to buy, does that include the sales tax? And if it doesn't, you're going to have to calculate that for every single transaction that you're doing. I tended to just keep it included because I didn't want to deal with people handing me quarters. I like to keep whole dollars. I didn't want to deal with a bunch of change at the end of the day or have to keep track, making sure I had enough pennies. It's just easier for me to include the sales tax in the price. You make the decision based on where you live and are you going to offer any cool sales or incentives for people to come and see you. We talked in the last video about getting the word out about your market and how that job really does fall on your shoulders. The more people that you tell, the higher chance that somebody's going to come and buy stuff from you. On the same note, a good way for people to get people to come and buy your is to offer them sales. Offer them an incentive to come and see you. Like, hey, usually this sells for this price, but for today only at this market, you can get it for this price. That's a good reason for people who have been eyeing your goods to actually come out and buy your goods. If I know that I can save a few bucks and shop local, that's gonna be more incentive for me to get out and actually go buy the thing as opposed to buying it online. So offering sales is really helpful. If you wanna move more product at the end of the day, say the last hour, you can offer sales then too. The last hour of a market tends to be really slow most of the time, but you can do this and can work really well to move your inventory if that's something you're wanting to do. Remember, if you like this video, feel free to give it a thumbs up. Please don't give it a thumbs down because I'm a highly sensitive person and that would make me sad, but I'm totally down for a thumbs up. I'm not going to tell you to subscribe because I don't really care for it when people do that. So you do you, you live your life. I'm not going to tell you what to do. Thanks for hanging out. I hope that you join us in the next video when we talk about actual physical things that you're going to need for your craft fair or market. There it is. I know that's what you were waiting for, so you're welcome.